Hello everyone and welcome to this new Blue-White Familiars video. Today we're gonna be doing something different, something else than usual, because a few people asked me on advice how to play the Familiars deck on Magic Online and not time out. If you've played FAMs on Magic Online already, you know that going through the combo is really obnoxious because there's no way how to just say, I have the win, milling your whole library. No, you have to go manually through the combo. And obviously, nobody wants to time out. Timing out games is like the worst possible outcome, especially if you have the game otherwise locked up. You have all the resources, all the combo pieces. You're just going through the combo, but you run out of time. By the way, there is something off in this picture, bonus points to whoever finds it. But anyway, I would like to give you guys some advice on how to play the Familiars deck efficiently. And you have to realize it's not just about the combo speed, it's not just about clicking through the infinite loop fast enough. It's also about your play speed in general. How fast you're going through your turns, how fast you're making decisions, and so on. And you might be surprised, but I actually consider playing Familiars on Magic Online easier than playing it on paper. Which is due to the simple fact that on Magic Online, you're the master of your own time, It's your clock. You have your 25 minutes. If you run out of them, it's only and only your fault that you haven't managed your time properly. Whereas playing in paper, obviously you don't have the big disadvantage of having to manually go through all the infinite loops for several minutes. But in general, the paper gameplay is slower because all the deck shuffling and explaining the combo to your opponent, And even though you may be miles ahead in the game, you may still get draws, and it might not even be anyone's fault or bad will. It just happens. So I will be giving my advice on Paper Pauper Familiars gameplay as well in the later part of this video. So first things first, and this applies both to online and paper gameplay, you wanna be able to recognize all the combos in your deck. I'm not speaking about the obvious interactions of like snap plus bounce land, netting humana, etc. There's a lot of these little card interactions in the deck, but now I'm speaking about the infinite loops. Forgive me if you already know this stuff from your own gameplay or my previous videos, but I would kind of like to put this here into one place. So all the infinite loops. Usually you need to have 2 familiars to make your blue spells cost 1 less mana. And you'll also be needing at least 1 mnemonic wall so that you can rebuy your spells. Alright, so one loop is with Ghostly Flicker. If you have the aforementioned creatures plus Ghostly Flicker plus Island, you can flicker Mnemonic Wall and Island for 1 blue mana. The Island comes in untapped, and the wall comes in and gets you flicker back. So this is basically Infinite Storm. And paired with Godfar's Faithful, this gives you infinite life. Paired with Sage's or Denizen, this mills the opponent for all the cards in their library. The second combo is you're using the same creatures, but you do not have access to Flicker. So if you don't have Flicker, but you have these creatures, you can work with Snap and 2 bounce lands for basically the same effect, because what you're gonna be doing is snapping on 1 mana on your Mnemonic Wall, untapping 2 bounce lands, netting you 2 white and 2 blue, recasting the mnemonic wall for 3 mana, getting back the snap, casting it on wall for 1 mana. So these cost combined amount of 4 mana, and you're untapping with 4 mana every time. You could technically even make infinite white or red mana if you have more than 2 familiars, because then the wall is gonna be cheaper, but you cannot make infinite blue, because the Karoo lands, you're gonna be spending both of the blue mana they give you. And of course this loop you can again combine with either a Faithful or a Denizen to gain infinite life or mill the opponent down. The other loop is you're gonna be needing double mnemonic wall, both the snap and flicker, and you're gonna need either 2 familiars or a familiar and a bounce land. So this combo can go infinite with just having 1 familiar in play. And I guess also you need 1 island to untap. So what this loop does is bounce all opposing or friendly or whatever creatures. Basically you're gonna have a free snap, because snap costs only 1 blue mana with a fam. You're gonna snap a creature, untap your Chancery and Island. You're gonna flicker on 2 mnemonic walls. Flicker costing only 2 mana in this case, so the Chancery pays for it. And you're gonna return the flicker with 1 and the snap with the second wall, enabling you to essentially bounce all the creatures you want to the opponent's hand. Pair this combination with Godfar's Faithful, you can also gain life. With the Sage Row you can also mill the opponent, but you are limited by the number of creatures in play, so you cannot go quite infinite. But what you can do is, if you also have a second familiar or a second bounce land, now you're gonna be netting 1 more white mana. So what you can do, having access to all of these cards, is obviously you wanna kill the opponent by milling them, but as I stipulated earlier, you are limited by the amount of creatures in play, because snap needs to have a valid target. So what you're gonna be doing here is snapping your own Godfar's Faithful, because now you have the white mana to pay for it. You know, snap generates 4 mana, snap itself costs 1, flicker costs 2, and Faithful costs 1. So you are spending 4 mana to infinitely snap your own Faithful and flicker your walls. And you're gonna be milling the opponent for 4 every time you flicker your walls. And this is without having the second Sunscape familiar, which you would otherwise need for the mill combo to happen. So these are basically just the 3 infinite loops in the deck. So there's 3 of them, but there are different variations. Some of the cards work interchangeably, so that's what you have to keep in mind. You should be able to recognize these loops and take advantage of them whenever you can. The other combos are the non-infinite ones. I'd call them, let's say, Logdowns. So basically you can lock the opponent by Mnemonic Wall plus Ghostly Flicker plus Stonehoard Dignitary to deprive them of their combat steps. Note that the Stonehoard triggers stack, so that your opponents might be skipping multiple combat steps if you stack multiple triggers of the Dignitary. The second lock would be Serrated Arrows, which you can again reset by flickering it and the Mnemonic Wall to get flicker back. And resetting the arrows puts it back to 3 counters and puts it into play untapped, so you can immediately use 1 to shoot down an opposing creature. And the third lock would be the counterspell lock. So if you're playing negate main deck or post board, works with all of the counter magic you might want to play. What you'll do is flicker 2 of your mnemonic walls, 1 getting back the flicker, 1 getting back the counterspell, and negating an opposing spell basically for every 2 blue mana you have access to, which might win you the game by itself against certain decks. Speaking about winning, you have to distinguish 2 things. There are multiple ways of how to put the game on lockdown so that your opponent essentially cannot win. Be it gaining infinite life with Faithful, or shooting down all their creatures, or making it so that your opponent can no longer attack through the rest of the game, assembling the counterspell lock as I just described, assembling the snap all their creatures. But you need to realize that in Pauper there are actually only 2 ways how to actually win the game. So once you have the game on lockdown, you want to figure out the way to win. And even though we are not a fast combo deck, we can technically win on turn 4 the earliest, but more often than not you're gonna be winning around turn 10 or whatever. After all, Familiars is kind of the ultimate late game deck, so the longer the game goes, the more advantaged you are, so there's no rush. But you still need to keep somewhere in the back of your head, how am I gonna actually win this game? Because obviously your plan 1, plan A, is milling the opponent with Satyr's Throw, Denizen. But things might happen, You might get the Satyr's exiled accidentally. There's a ton of cards that exile cards. You might not even have any chance to do anything about it. He's just gone. You have to figure out a plan B. Or sometimes you just don't want to go for the mill plan on Magic Online because it takes too much of your clock. So the plan B is the creature beatdown. Basically you stabilize and then you beat them down with your Muldrifters and whatnot, but there are actually only 10 creatures in this deck that can attack, one of them being the Satyr, which you at that point probably don't have, and all of them have power of either 1 or 2. So the beatdown plan might be problematic as well. The third plan is to mill the opponent the hard way, essentially to wait for them to deck themselves. This might be a problem because we are often the deck who is drawing more cards than the opponent, but there are certain effects which might help the opponent deck themselves first. For example, if they are on like blue-black with all of the self-mill spells, or if they're playing a Monarch, you might wanna just stop attacking and let them draw their deck with the Monarch. And you can also give them a little help with Deep Analysis, but note that in this version of the deck we're not playing Prosperous Pirates, therefore we aren't able to make infinite mana and deck them infinitely through draw spells. So Analysis will just help you with the couple of remaining cards once they have almost decked their library. You can also flicker your Mortuary Mire in a pinch to stop yourself from decking first, but that is usually the last resort. But repeating, essentially you have a million ways of how to put the game on lockdown so that your opponent cannot win anymore, but you only have 3 ways of how to actually win, which is 1, the Sagero Mill, 2nd, the Beatdown, 3rd, the Hard Mill or Deep Analysis Mill. And technically there's the 4th option of your opponent conceding, but you can never rely on them doing that, and you should never expect them to do so. So again, even though you might be at a different stage of the game, For example, your main concern is trying to figure out how to overcome whatever the opponent is doing, and it doesn't seem like you will be winning the game anytime soon anyway, you still need to have this question in the back of your head: how am I actually gonna win this game eventually? Because the opponent might deprive you of some of these ways, or you might even deprive yourself of them. For example, you can see me siding the Sage Row out to improve our post-board configuration for different matchups, but then obviously we are short of our main win condition and need to figure out an alternative way. Also, there are a lot of live game strategies in Pauper. Say you're playing against elves, you assemble the Stonehorn Lock, but your opponent has a bunch of well-wishers and a million elves, and you just won't be able to beat them down with Muldrifters. Therefore, you might need to resort to the hard mill plan, but that means that you might need to go through, say, 30 more turns, and you need to adjust your play speed to that plan so that you do not just run out of time. So this was generally on the combo and on how to win. Now let's go specifically into Magic Online, and let's start with some of the technicalities. So first thing first, you want to make sure that you have a stable connection and your client is not lagging, because if you disconnect during the game, it might cost you the match, because Magic Online is a slow program. It's not corresponding to the 21st century expected quality of software, but you gotta work with what you have. So again, make sure you're not lagging, restart your client if necessary. And now let's go into the account tab. I also like to turn down the summoning sickness and foil treatment animation. Not sure if that does anything, but what's more important is that you are comfortable with your keybinds. So go to the input settings, and you want to make sure you have F2, F6 and yes on keybind. Of course, you can use any buttons that fit you well. For example, I prefer to use number 4 as yes, so that I do not have to move my hand from the usual F2 position. But you want to make sure that you have functionally the F2, F6 and yes. Also, undo might help a lot, especially if you're new to the deck and you might be doing stuff that you want to put back, so make sure that you have undo. And you might want to try F8 out. Personally, I do not use F8. Basically what it does is that you press F8 once during the game, and then until you call it off, the game's gonna pass priority for you whenever you have no possible actions to perform. So basically you're disabling buffing. Personally, I prefer to have full manual control over what's happening, but I know some people like to play with F8. So now finally the important part. Let's do a simulation. So hosting a solitaire game for myself, where I'm gonna try and show you how to go through the combo. But first thing first, you want to adjust your stops. It's not showing the full stops because there's only one player in the game, but you can basically get rid of almost all the stops from your opponent's turn. Like, I don't have any beginning combat or main phase stop. I usually make just one stop for their end step. And of course you wanna keep the attack and blockers phase steps so that you can like flicker your blockers before damage. Alright, let's keep the hand. Gonna probably play a little sloppy, but that's alright. So you want to use the yield through this turn options extensively. So you have F6. I usually, after I perform my actions, whatever they are, play my stuff, F6. And then during the opponent's turn, if there was any, I use the yield through this turn, which is essentially also F6, but F6 usually only triggers, or it will only take effect if it's you that have priority, whereas you can press this without having priority, and then whenever you would be past priority, you just pass it automatically without any delay, but it's kind of min-maxing nonsense. Ooh. We have some pretty nice cards here. I wish I drew like that every time. Yeah, so I'm just gonna bottom everything but the combo pieces. So we're just looking for Wall and Sage Denizen and Fateful for me to show you. You also want to make sure that you yield to your triggers and stack them correctly. So important thing with Maldrifters, always click the evoke trigger first, so that you draw cards before you're sacrificing your guy, because you might not have the snap yet or flicker, but you might draw it. And even if you don't plan to do anything like that, it's just technically correct to do this play under any circumstances. And you should always yield to the draw trigger, but not to the evoke trigger, obviously. Yeah, so gonna snap it back. Repeat. Snap it back, there's the wall. Perfect. Can I get back the snap, get an island for more blue mana? Repeat the Maldrifter shenanigans. Okay, at this point I might as well analyze. Let's play the Fateful, sure, flashback analysis. Always yield to the Fateful triggers. Pass, discarding a bunch of stuff. I wanna have 2 bounce lands out for later. Okay, and there's the Denizen. Excellent. So, save the Maldrifter for starters. Okay, and the combo. So, having Denizen in play, let's actually go to next turn just to have more lands out. So going through the combo, most ideal way how to do it, I'd say, is to do the flicker loop. The flicker loop is a little bit faster than the snap loop and a lot faster than the creature bounce link loop. So ideally, I will float all my island mana first. Target the flicker, target a land, target a wall. These go on a stack, and because you have a Fateful in play, the game makes you pause. There is no way around it. You will need to pass priorities. So while I'm resolving the flicker, I'm already spamming F2 to pass priority. don't be afraid that you're gonna press F2 too many times, because if you have unresolved triggers or triggers that you need to assign targets for, spamming F2 won't do anything, so you are free to spam it during this point of the game. Now we're gonna take the Sage Row trigger, target the opposing player, but now we have only one player in the game. Take the wall, target the flicker. I prefer to play with my graveyard here, like in this little extra column, because if you're gonna have it down here, it's gonna just pop up and pop back, you know? It's gonna keep doing this nonsense. You could also play with your graveyard popped like this, but it's gonna take a lot of space and I don't like it either, so I would advise using this extra column. Flicker is always gonna be the one at the bottom, so you wanna make sure that you have the stack and the area of triggers somewhere nearby, so that there's not a long distance you need to make with your mouse to mouse over. You want to make sure you always yield to both of these abilities and smack yes as you're resolving the wall trigger. Now, since I'm still floating mana, I'm gonna just use the mana that's already in my pool and doing the same thing. Targeting the player, targeting the flicker. Note that if, for example, your opponent has milled your graveyard, you will need to target for the wall trigger. It will automatically resort to the only legal target. Same way if I like flicker in a solitaire, in a single player, you know, I don't need to put the Sage Row on the stack because there's only one legal player to target, so it will go through automatically. So again, targeting flicker, island, wall, smashing F2, targeting player, targeting flicker, smashing yes. Fast motion, it would be something like this. And so on. Alright, so the slightly slower option is to go with the snap loop. So let's get back the snap. What we need for this loop is the 2 bounce lands, so I'm gonna be snapping an Immunic Wall for 1 mana, pressing OK again as the snap is going onto the stack, untapping carefully. Now this is tricky because model just keeps resizing. Floating mana, recasting the wall, milling player, getting back the snap. Again, fast motion, it would be something like this. You can kind of spam the lands as you're untapping and tapping them. You just need not to pass priority during that time. Okay, so the third infinite loop would be to infinitely snap our creature. So let's imagine that let's actually play the wall, and let's imagine that we only have access to one familiar, right? So we're gonna snap the fam. You know, imagine that we don't have the familiars, but we want to mill our opponent with what we have, which we actually can, because what we'll do is float the mana, flicker our walls, pay the extra white, stack the mill triggers, return snap and flicker, press yes, and then we're gonna be snapping on our own God First Faithful to basically make mana. Then we are recasting the Faithful, casting flickers on the wall, choosing targets, and so on. Again, fast motion, maybe something like this. Another small advice would be you always want to float your mana first so that you don't need to kind of go all over the place with your mouse. Just limit the amount of clicks you need to perform to the bare minimum. And you also want to kind of limit your hand size. So for example, if I were searching for, let's say the Sage Row is the only win con I'm searching for, I might be flickering Wall plus Seagate instead of Wall plus Muldrifter. You know, if I'm otherwise just winning the game anyway, for sure, I will flicker the Seagate so that not only I myself deck later before I find the Denizen, but also so that I don't have too many cards in my hand, because if I had like a couple more cards than I have now, then they would scroll here to the right and I'd need to press the button here to get to my flicker or snap when they are returned by the wall. So that's an unnecessary action we don't want to be performing. I have to warn you, sometimes the opponents might get a little salty. They might even try to time you out, you know, like by performing actions that do not make any sense based on where the game is going. For example, like you are milling them and they are tapping their Well-Wishers and Quirion Rangers to gain life. But there's no way around that, and you can actually use it a little bit to your advantage, like position your mouse to wherever it needs to be while they are casting their spells. So just don't get fooled, don't get annoyed by that. One of the most important things I would suggest you do before you pick up the deck on Magic Online is to do a few of these solitaire games on your own, not only to test the interaction of the cards themselves, but also to improve your combo speed. Because you have to be realistic about how fast are you able to kill the opponent, how fast can you mill them down with the different interactions, different versions of the combo. I, for example, take something like 2.5 minutes to mill the opponent with the usual flicker on Wall plus Island loop if they have around 40 cards in the deck, you know. And that's not like rushing it, but I can't go much faster either. And especially if time is pressing you, you know, and your hands might be shaking a little bit, I know this is weird, like you normally wouldn't say that Magic Online is an FPS game, you know, but sometimes it feels like it if you have to rush for the combo. So you really have to be realistic about your combo speed, test it out a little bit, and also if you say if you are in a game 2 and it's not going very well for you, you might wanna concede games that you know are not very likely to be a win, just to get a good chance at winning game 3, for example. Like if my plan A is to mill the opponent in game 3, I want to have at least 8 minutes on my clock. But I would prefer to have something like 10. And if game 2 is just not developing very nicely for me, I might just scoop that one to give myself a better chance for finishing game 3 on time. Finally, and probably most importantly, I'd say don't feel too sad if you can't finish the game on time, and especially don't be salty about it to the opponent, because I know that there are different schools of thinking. Some people think that like as soon as you show that you are able to combo off, the opponent should scoop, but in reality nobody is obliged to scoop to you showing the combo. You have to be able to go through it, and if you cannot execute it on time, that's on you. The loss is gonna be yours to suffer. And the only thing you can do about it is improve, get better, get faster. And believe me, this is gonna improve your gameplay in general. Like whenever I pick up any kind of slow deck that takes a lot of time to win, the experience I have with Familiar has helped me to navigate games with these decks in a manner that I can win in a time-efficient manner. Alright, here we are for the Paper Pauper part, as I promised earlier. So there's just a couple of things I would like to mention. First, obviously, in Paper Pauper you do not need to go through any obnoxious clicking loops like you do on Magic Online. You basically just show your opponent how your combo works, show them the win, and that's usually it for them to scoop. So let's say tap a blue to flicker on wall plus island, resolves, island comes untapped, wall returns flicker, melee for 2, repeat, and so on. Of course, you still have to respect the opponent might have responses. For example, if you're milling a blue-black teachings deck who might have a lot of mana untapped but no action in hand, but once you mill their teachings, they will teach for some counterspell and counter your next flicker. So in that case, you are required to resolve these parts of the loop independently. But there's a niche trick for that, because you do not need to pass to the Sage Root Denizen trigger. So basically what you will do is stack the Sage Root trigger, go through the flicker loop, but not let opponent mill. Before they mill, you wanna stack it so that you first put the mill trigger on the stack, then the wall trigger on the stack, you let the wall trigger resolve, and you'll be basically coupling Sage Roll triggers on top of each other. This of course you can also do on Magic Online, but the stack gets increasingly hard to work with, so that's why I'm usually not doing that there, but it's a good trick for these kind of decks. But basically, winning with the combo in Paper is easy. What's harder though is, say, if you don't have the combo yet, the hard part is remembering all your triggers. And not only you have to remember your triggers, you have to announce them properly. So say if you wanna evoke a Muldrifter and snap it and then hardcast it and play Seagate or something like that might be my plan for this turn, judging from the current situation, board state. What I'll do is evoke Muldrifter, and basically along with announcing the spell, you need to announce the life gain trigger. Otherwise, if you pass priority to the opponent to say whether the Muldrifter is resolving or not, you are denying yourself your life gain trigger, and it's your own responsibility to keep an eye on that. There's gonna be no takebacks. Like if your opponent is strict about it, this is how you have to do it. So basically, while I'm casting my Muldrifter, I'm already announcing gain a life and picking up my pen to write down the life total. Which is next thing, you definitely do not want to use dice for tracking your life total. Just like searching from, I'm at 18, wanna go to 19 or where it is. Now I wanna go to 20. Will take you usually a while to find, whereas pen and paper is faster. If you have a lot of these life gain triggers during one turn, what you can do is like ask the opponent to track it down if they're nice enough, and then just write it for yourself after you're done with all the loops. Or just remember which spells have you cast this turn and then multiply that at the end of that by the number of your faithfuls. But still you have to announce the triggers going to the stack and resolving. Another thing is keeping track of your mana. Some people use dice for that as well. I would also advise not to use them, but if you insist on keeping track of your mana, say I'm evoking a Muldrifter, now I'm floating the Chancery mana, and I wanna snap it, I would advise using tokens or counters like this. So say floating Chancery mana, spending one of that to snap, snap resolves, returning Muldrifter, untapping, tapping my bounce lands for 2 blue, a red and a white. Let's say I wanna hardcast and keep a blue in my mana pool, and so on. Seems much easier. Of course, also need to be drawing the cards and gaining life of a faithful. One last thing I would like to mention for Pauper gameplay is that you need to sideboard a little bit differently. Basically, what you want to do is keep in the Sage Road Denizen in your deck, especially if it's going to game 3. You want to keep it in most matchups. Like on online, if you're a skilled pilot already, you can often side the Sage Road out, but because in Pauper you and your opponent basically share the same game time, you do not want to rely on them playing the game fast enough. And sometimes it might not even be their fault. Take that Elves match I had a few days ago, if you watched my previous video on that, where I basically sided out Sage Road Denizen for game 3, and I went for the hard mill plan because I couldn't kill them with Muldrifters either once I assembled my Stonehorn lock. I just had to wait for the opponent to draw out naturally, and we had to play for like 30 turns. If this happened in Pauper, it probably would have been a draw, because even if the opponent plays at a reasonable pace where the judge cannot interfere, the game will just take way too long, and all the game actions in Pauper take longer than they take on online, because all the shuffling and triggers and whatnot. So keep the Sage Road in for games like that. Alright, so there you have my advice on playing Pauper familiars, both on Magic Online and in paper. To conclude this video, I would like to give you guys my own statistic, because I keep track of the games I've played, or at least most of the competitive games I've played, both on Magic Online and in paper. So on MTGO, I've kept track of 248 league matches, league or challenge matches, out of which 7 were timeouts, where I ran out of time in game 3 during execution of the combo. So that equals to something like 2.8% timeout ratio on Magic Online. Whereas in paper, out of the 54 matches that I have recorded, 4 of them were draws. So obviously these are not timeouts during execution of combo, because that is not technically possible in paper Pauper, but these were draws where I think I would have otherwise won the game had I had enough time to finish the game. So this is something like 7.4% of my games were draws. And to be noted, I also had some 1-0s in paper, where I, for example, in one game finished game 1 in the 5th extended round. I know that is quite extreme, but again, this is just to prove the point that once you get really familiarized with this deck and know all the combos and how to play it well and fast enough, Magic Online, at least in my opinion, favors the Familiars deck over paper gameplay. On the other hand, I have to mention that I have a considerably higher win rate in paper Pauper with Familiars rather than on online, but this may be caused by a difference in metagame, and also I guess the sample size of my paper play is not high enough for a reliable statistic. But anyway, this video has already been far too long. A lot longer than I originally intended, but still I hope you've at least learned a thing or two. I wish you best of luck in your own familiar matches. I hope that now, if you haven't tried it already, you will feel more confident stepping into Magic Online leagues or bringing the FAMS deck into your local game store. And may you never time out. Thanks for watching.